Welcome back to the Combo Couch, everyone. Pasta Jardula here, and Johnny Sue spinning on the ones and twos. And today we have a special guest. I've been working with this guy, getting on a show, having him on my show, seeing him at rallies. You know him. His name is Jason Bermas, a la Bermy, the info warrior, the independent, I call him documenteur. He was a producer of Loose Change, really changed the perspective on 9/11, and he is the accused creator of QAnon nowadays. Jason Bermas, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good, brother. How are you? I'm enjoying the madness post Biden being inaugurated, and I mean, it's just kind of like an extension, I guess, of what we saw pre Biden being inaugurated. These short sound bites where they don't let the press really get to him. He signs a bunch of things. He does pretty much basically what we expected via the establishment, and then he goes away, and the media praises him for it. But so far in the day to day, because I don't need insulin or epinephrine. It hasn't affected me personally yet. In the good state of Iowa, shout out to the Quad Cities. This whole mask mandate has not really taken into effect. People are scoffing at it. It's not really enforced. And that's a big important thing to me because, my mental health is important. And I got to tell you, it improved so much from going from upstate New York and then moving here in the past few months. I can't even tell you. I smile a lot more, Pasta.
No, I can tell, man, and I would think the same thing. Living out here in Los Angeles, just wondering what's going to happen. We're still on edge, and I look at my neighbors out there, and I feel bad for them because I know they haven't paid the rent in a long time. But also one of those other places that are really, when I talk about Biden, you don't live in Syria, you don't live in Yemen, you don't live in Afghanistan. With all these people he's appointing, you talk about, you did a video with Rand Paul and Stephanopoulos talking about the election. Also, there's a video out there Medhurst did with Rand Paul on the Senate approval of Anthony Blinken. And, he threw all this stuff at Anthony Blinken. Didn't you learn anything from Iraq? He did the same thing in Syria. What have you learned? What's going on? And you still get the obfuscating, the bullshit, yeah. We're going to go back in there. We're going to put more troops. And in fact, we're going to double down. And we're going to anoint a guy who works at Raytheon as the Secretary of Defense on top of it. Dude was selling missiles 2 weeks ago. Now he's the Secretary of Defense. But you know what? He's the first black Secretary of Defense out there. So show some love, Jay.
Oh, come on. Didn't we all play that war black guy card with Colin Powell, who another would, and everybody was, and by the way, Powell was pre-Obama, right? So he kind of got a pass in telling you all the bad news, like there were fake chemical weapons plants. Remember that whole presentation, Colin Powell?
I remember it.
And he never had his feet held to the fire. And I'm sorry if this is too little racy for some people, but that's them playing the political race card, so that if you actually question the warmongering of them killing other black and brown people, you're the bigot.
Yeah.
You're the bigot. Not the people that signed up for this, that you, like you said, doubled down, that put the drones in the air, that indiscriminately kill civilians, children. You're the bigot. It's a good play. Good for you. Way to go with those identity politics that many people are just buying into these days.
Well, they still use it. It's still their biggest weapon. They haven't moved away from it. And hey, it works. Stick with what works, right? You got all these neo-progressives out there that have just literally got behind Biden and the establishment saying, oh, this cabinet pick is a breath of fresh air. Yeah, because Blinken was on Sesame Street with Grover. It makes everything all right. The fact that he's, bombing children in Libya doesn't mean a thing. But let's not talk craziness. Let's talk conspiracy theory, because you've been accused since you started. You were one of those people. I mean, I think they were out there. They say, look at this guy, Jason Bermas. He looks like a QAnoner. He's the one who started QAnon, but you really debunk QAnon a lot. So can you give a little bit of unpacking to our audience that you didn't start QAnon and what you actually think about it?
Right. So this is kind of complex because they've been able to now take this whole QAnon thing and make it into the hype, crazy conspiracy thing by pointing out a lot of the crazy conspiracy stuff that is, of course, not only unprovable, but pasta, completely and totally false. Now, unfortunately, there are a lot of things based in the people that believe in that because they look at the case of Epstein. They look at Hollywood pedophiles that have been outed in media, such as Bryan Singer and now Kevin Spacey and others. And they go, look, this is real, right?
Yeah.
But then they bring in all this fake stuff. Now, with the 9/11 Truth movement, it's kind of the same way, right? And they so desperately wanted to attach then 9/11 Truth with domestic terror and white supremacy. Now, they've done a great job bridging the gap between QAnon and white supremacy, right? And
Yeah.
remember, these are all the new domestic terror laws. So with 9/11 Truth, the biggest thing out there at the time was Loose Change, which I was a part of. And it got a lot of people to turn their heads. So naturally, because Loose Change got people to question 9/11, which people should still be questioning today. They should check out my second film on that, Fabled Enemies, Loose Change Final Cut. It's all free in my playlist section. Go debunk it, please, or debate me about it. I debate all people all the time.
Yeah.
They want that now to be material you're not allowed to see on the internet or that can be immediately censored, just like the QAnon stuff, and bridge the gap of domestic terror. So it works in their favor. So that's why, James McDermott, to his credit, although it was still the headline, by the end he said, we didn't start it. We didn't start that culture. We can't be held accountable. But it didn't stop him from quoting people like Tim Dillon and Mark Cuban and going back to popular.
Who is
mechanics.
McDermott? Can you explain who McDermott is to the audience?
Yeah, James McDermott is basically, and I follow him on Twitter. I even talk back and forth. We follow each other. I like the guy. But he's just an independent journalist that at first he was doing the article for Wired. He'd done some stuff on these alt-right DJs that he went to college with. And, you could tell he didn't like Trump and he doesn't like Alex Jones and things like that, right? I knew where this was going, but at least he allowed me to tape our interviews together. And then he said he would come on my show post the interview, which he did, okay? Yeah. And we could debate. And we did an hour-long broadcast. But if he hadn't come on, he told me I could have released the other interviews. That's all I want. I want accountability and honesty. If you're going to spin something one way, at least let me retort, which he did. Now, that didn't stop. Basically, Vice is doing the same thing. Inside Edition did a 5-minute piece about it. Basically, that our movie got people to question things, and that's what really started QAnon. When even in probably 2008, when I started working for Alex Jones and InfoWars, right? People would sell me or try to sell me on this thing called Nasara, right? And you saw that resurge with QAnon. And basically it was this government document that had passed that people would point to that, don't worry, there are good people, white hats in control, and everything's going to be all right. But it was from the late 90s. And I'm like, well, if this is true, then how did 9/11 happen? What's going on now, And with the indictment thing, especially with 9/11 Truth, I had seen somebody who was, again, these are classic disinformation campaigns. He put out a lot of good information. His name was Tom Flacco, right?
Yeah.
And at the time Scooter Libby was being indicted, he was talking about secret indictments and everything was going to be okay. And Dick Cheney had secretly been indicted. And this coup was going to happen. We were all going to get saved from George Bush. And remember, this is kind of in the beginning of the war on terror. We hadn't expanded to AFRICOM. Syria wasn't a thing. We were beating the drums against Iran. So that was the beginning of a lot of the disinformation that would come out in 9/11 Truth. And then it would spin out of control into no planes and holograms and, directed energy weapons. And basically, that's the equivalent now to QAnon and adrenochrome sacrifices. And like we've talked, we've had private conversations. I always try to go into the historical stuff of where those kind of fantasies are based in. But then you look at some of these cases, and I'm encouraging people to go check out the Clown and the Candyman podcast from Investigation Discovery. I think they just released the 8th one in that series. It's an 8-part series. I'm 3 behind. That will show you how actual elite pedophile works and worked over decades, and how it did involve intelligence and it did involve supposed serial.
What's it called again?
The Clown and the Candyman. And it's about Dean Carroll, John Wayne Gacy, another pedophile island where they were using foundations for young boys, the Catholic Church, Boy Scouts, you name it, and the CIA. And it's the real deal, Camille. And that's the thing. When you have that kind of stuff and you start listening to that, your mind runs wild. And then you allow yourself to want to think someone's going to come and save you, and that Tom Hanks is obviously a pedophile. and that's what and that's where the mental illness begins. And I remember, dude, when I was going down these really crazy rabbit holes post 9/11, right? I was watching it all. And I was big time back in the day critical of David Icke, very critical of him. Because of the Anunnaki and the reptilian alien thing.
The reptilian thing is what got me. Like the whole, I've been to a David Icke. I worked actually filming a David Icke thing. I got a job doing it, and I was into it. And then the very end of it, he started going into the reptilian thing, and I lost everything. But sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, you're like, and that was one of my biggest problems with David, is that people were associating that with 9/11 and truth. And I was like, if we ever want like us to look at this for real, we can't have that. But Ike has remained very consistent. I at least have to give him that. I don't agree with it. You know what I'm saying? But it's kind of like when you get into those things, and even now with Alex Jones always talking about interdimensional elves and these things, you lose people. You lose people. And that's why most of the time, instead of these long form, they can go anywhere podcasts, which are great, and I do like them, I try to give these kind of concise, we're going to try to stick on this subject and go through it and hammer it home, because that's important to fight the disinformation. Because if they want the final truth on 9/11, they're going to want the final truth on JFK. They're going to want the final truth on any kind of military conflict we've been in. And as you can see very overtly in front of our face, which we were discussing before the show, you know, guys like Stephanopoulos, 60 Minutes, all these mainstream media outlets are just dictating their narrative as absolute truth without any pushback and without having to provide any evidence.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, let's talk about a few things real quick, because you've hit some interesting points there, and I really think that, you know, people need to go check out your movie, Loose Change, because it really does. A lot of people are like, well, why would they do that? What's going on? And I think you lay it out clearly at the very end. Listen, because of 9/11, that changed so much of our foreign policy. The AUMF was birthed right out of that. So now the head of state, you know, doesn't even have to go to Congress to start bombing people. He can just do it. And then the security state, how powerful it got with the Patriot Act, whatnot. And it allowed them to do whatever they need to do, that being the elites or whoever's running this joint, meaning the whole planet, to sit there, spy on us, look on us, listen to our conversations, go wherever they want, resource extraction over here. And they use the media to do those things. But let me digress for a second, because when I first saw you was when you came on the Rockfin, and I didn't know who Jason Bermas was. And I was kind of skeptical. And to be honest with you, I had heard that you had worked for Alex Jones, whatnot. Now, I can tell you from a leftist point of view, from a lot of the leftists out there, the reason why they hate Alex Jones is the Sandy Hook thing, right? They can't stand the fact that he says that Sandy Hook was fake and the reasons behind it. They think it's awful. So therefore, they discredit everything about him. Mm-hmm. However, I kind of look at Alex Jones, and there's a lot of things I was like, okay, is Alex Jones being Alex Jones? But his main thesis to me is you can't trust your government. Your government's lying to you. But I have a hard time, you know, kind of figuring out or distinguishing what is real and what's not real. What was your relationship like with Alex Jones? And can you give us a little insight to why you thought it was okay and maybe the backlash you might get? Because I don't look at you as like an Alex Jones guy where people go, oh, you know, Bermas is a QAnoner, he's a 9/11 truther and whatnot. And I'm like, I haven't experienced that with Jason. And in fact, I've experienced a great bridge to those wannabe QAnoners that go crazy and to what's really going on and looking at everything in the receipts he has. And I think it's kind of refreshing. And it's interesting to look at Jason Bermas's point of view. But the relationship with Alex Jones, can you kind of explain that right now? Because a lot of people on the left, they have a hard time. Once they hear the names Alex Jones, they're gone.
Yeah, it's funny. I guess I should just kind of start with my first Alex Jones experience. So this is prior to the Iraq War, and I'm like, again, this kind of junkie on the internet, on the Nutella network, the Notella network, Morpheus, you know, LimeWire sometimes, but all these different file share networks. And I'm pulling as much information as I can from 9/11, raw information. And eventually I come to The Road to Tyranny, this torrent to A Road to Tyranny, or I found it on some back website. But it was a real media file. It was like 70 megabytes, 2.5 hour film, out of sync, 144p. I mean, awful, awful. And I watched this thing, And it's this guy with this really rednecky voice trying to tell me about the New World Order and 9/11. And I'm thinking to myself, I am going to disprove the vast majority of this. No problem. In fact, Alex's even young voice really irritated me, especially in the very beginning when I saw this film. So I start going through it. And I'm like, damn, that article's real. Oh my God, this is actually worse than that. Man, I hate that he uses this term, but okay. And like I'd say about 80+% I was able, especially the 9/11 stuff, was able to find the source material, and it, I was like, geez, well, okay. So at the time, Bush was president, and I remember, I'm going down every rabbit hole I can. I'm getting other Alex Jones stuff. I'm watching him at one of the things. I remember I laughed out loud. It was one of the funniest things I'd ever seen, but at the same time, one of the bravest. He was out at one of the national parks. Might have been the Grand Canyon, might not have been. It was in one of his previous films. Might have been Police State 2000 or something like that. And this group of tourists is there, and he's trying to explain to them that the United Nations has taken all this land, right? And they had. And basically, for those that don't know, the United States pledged all this land to the UN in this kind of overt, or I guess covert method of legitimizing their power in world government that we're starting to see more and more. And it was like this land grab where it can do certain things. And I'm just thinking to myself, watching all these people watch him. Again, this is the days of the VHS, pre-internet, basically, when he put this out. And I'm like, well, this guy's got some of the biggest balls I've ever seen in my life. Good for him. So fast forward to Loose Change and whatnot. Eventually, we're getting in touch with all sorts of people, and Alex reaches out to us. And, he wants to buy, I think, 5,000 or 10,000 copies or something like that, have us on the show, talk about it. And that's really where it started. And then I met Alex at a 9/11 Truth event in Chicago. I met a lot of people there for the very first time, although there were some old favorites like Luke Radowski of We Are Change I'd already met, and we'd already, grown a pretty good relationship. Richard Andrew Grove, who does Grand Theft World and Tragedy and Hope. First time I met him was there. First time I met Webster Tarpley was there. I want to say that's where I met Ted Gunderson. In fact, I'm 100% sure. Got to spend time with him, interviewed him.
I know none of these people, by the way.
Well, I'll tell you
They're
what,
all
man.
new names to me.
Well, Webster Tarpley, just a lot of people that I had studied their work, and Alex Jones, was one of them. Gary Franchi, Next News Network. Gary Franchi was there with Lone Lantern Group before he was doing Next News. And we had beers with Jones, and I started a rapport with him. And again, at the time, I felt like he had more in common with like the Cindy Sheehans of the world than the left, because we were going after the Bush administration, right? And Dick Cheney.
Was this post Sandy Hook or pre Sandy Hook?
Oh, way pre Sandy Hook. We'll get to Sandy Hook because I've done videos on Jones and Sandy Hook.
Yeah.
And I was in touch with the office. I certainly wasn't working for him, and I didn't like the coverage there, but he produced several of my films. The guy mentored me. We were really good friends. I mean, I'm going to be really honest with everybody. Alex Jones at a steakhouse or a burrito place is the same Alex Jones you see on the air. Now, what does that mean? That means that sometimes he can be kind of calm and concise and get through to you. If the queso's cold, he can go into an elf-driven madman. Like, you know what I'm saying? At any moment. It's not really an act. So
this is queso by the deep state. Don't touch it.
I mean, just on any level. It doesn't have to be about the deep state. It could literally be about the popcorn at the movie theater. You know what I'm saying? Like, or the hot dog at, the crate on the side. So many things. But Jones was Jones, man. I kind of just accepted that. Obviously, there are a lot of parts of Jones that, I think he needs to work on, or has to, but we all do. You kind of accept that he's a force of nature.
Nobody's perfect. Nobody's got their shit together. Let's be honest.
Yeah. But the bottom line is you also have to be accountable for what you do, and especially in this whole thing. So anyway, we got to a point where I did another film because he had produced Loose Change Final Cut. I came out, I did Fabled Enemies. I became his stand-in host, and he was expanding. This is when he was really going to start the InfoWars network. It really hadn't been started before that. If you go watch when I was standing in for him, I'm like in this dreary, dark sound booth. You can go watch these videos, and so is he. He basically had this shop outside of Austin, which there was a Vato barbershop where like literally Mexican gang members were coming and hanging out all the time. And then he had these two Korean brothers that owned a grocery store in the facility, and the whole place looked like a barn. And he moved that into AMD's old studios, and that's when it all started. So I came back, and this time, instead of Fabled Enemies, which is my 9/11 follow-up, which I really think everybody needs to see, it has Joe Biden in it. Like, I exposed Joe Biden so many years ago, 12, 13 years ago, before he was even the vice president. He was on my radar for a lot of reasons. Okay, so people need to go watch that film and see that he helped cover up Pakistan's role in 9/11. That's 100%. I got him on tape twice. I got him talking about it being like classified. It's crazy. And
Which movie was that? That was the second one.
That's Fabled Enemies. It's not Loose Change. So Pasta, you go give that a watch. It's going to even open up more doors where you're going to be like, oh my God. Like that. Whereas Loose Change focuses more on the physical anomalies, there is no physical anomaly focus at all in Fabled Enemies. Instead, we talk about the Pakistani, the Saudi Arabian, and the Israeli involvement. We talk about these guys training at U.S. bases and where and why. Okay, we talk about the cover-up post facto. I mean, there's so much more. I got what is it? Bob Graham in this one.
I'm gonna check it out. I already watched Loose Change. Let's
that's the next must watch. So anyway, he produces that, and he like offers me a show. We're expanding Comeback. And so I come back and I do Invisible Empire, another one I'm hoping that people check out. But Invisible Empire is my New World Order film, because I wanted to dispel the myth that was like some kind of crazy person term, because certainly it's been portrayed that for a long time, and now it's gaining more and more acceptance. But when I was doing my homework, I'm like, wow, this has been used throughout history and kind of in the same context. I think this is important. Yeah. So we expand. He gives me the show The Info Warrior. I get done with that. Now, at the time, I was living in Texas, but I still had my New York home. And I wanted to come back to New York, and that was it, So while I was in New York and I was no longer working for Alex Jones, I was still DMing people like Aaron Dykes and Rob Jacobson that worked for him. And Sandy Hook comes along. And I have done extensive videos on Alex Jones, Sandy Hook, what I believe, what they put out there, what I think he should be held accountable for. And the truth of the matter is, I would, again, if people want my full idea about Sandy Hook, I don't think we were told the truth. I do think those children were murdered. I think that the people that helped do these things, because I'm not saying Lanza's innocent by any means. I want to make that abundantly clear, and I don't want people to think I think there are actors or any of that. That's not what I saw in the evidence. For those that don't know, and I'm just going to make it quick, there were several hoodies left outside of that car. People were obviously targeted who died in there. For instance, one of the teachers' car was shot up in the parking lot where nobody else's was. That's pretty odd that there were targets. And then, on top of all of that, there were reports in the beginning that the way that several people gained access, that they were dressed like clergy. Okay? Now, you could push that away, but then they actually have police radio where they say they're in pursuit of a purple van with people dressed up like nuns. And they're headed towards Danbury, Connecticut, which would be the closest airport, which is very odd. And that's just some of the stuff. So my point was that there were it goes even deeper than that. There were actual real questions that I had. And about a year after Sandy Hook, when the controversy was still going and even more theories were flying around, and that's when the heat started to come on, right, with the even more crisis actor talk and all this other stuff that I don't agree with at all, they released an abundance of information. They released gigabytes. I think the full thing was something like 13, 14 gigs. I was one of the first people to download it, right? Ton of blacked out stuff, from the photographs to the video footage, which dash cam, all that stuff. A lot of interesting stuff too. So I spent a lot of time on this. I'm not going to lie. I could have gone way deeper than I did. If I was going to do a film project, I probably would have subjected myself to more, but it was just such a macabre and muddled issue, right?
Yeah.
I sent all this stuff to InfoWars. To their detriment, they did not listen to me. And even Aaron Dykes, post-working there, we've had conversations. He didn't want to touch it. And again, for what he said, he should be held accountable for that. 110%. And I've always said that, and that's why you know, you have to judge every man for from their own labor, right? And the fruit shall come. I'm always going to have an association with loose change. I'm always going to have an association with Alex Jones for people that look into me.
Even your name, right? Even your name. A lot of people like the Info Warrior are like, oh, wait a second. This guy's is an Alex Jones disciple of sorts. Why should we listen to this guy?
Well, it's funny because like one of the headlines in the last few weeks with these Russian hack jobs or whatever, they're calling them groups of info warriors, right? Because they're so desperate to try to like associate anybody that would use that term with Alex. And yes, Alex coined it for sure. But what is wrong with going to battle in the info war? Like that's exactly what we're under. It's a genius term. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And I've never hid my identity or anything that I've done. Everybody knows who I really am. I wear my heart on my sleeve. I admit when I'm wrong. In fact, last night I attributed a quote that was for FDR to JFK. My bad, everybody. I'm going to apologize on the air right here. I can accept my mistakes. I'm a human being, man. And I pre-COVID 1984, brother, I've never liked masks. You know why? If you're going to go out there, if you're going to make it known, I want you to show your face, not because I want the enemy to know who you are, but because I want you to not have the fear to let the enemy know who you are. Because guess what? The enemy already knows who you are. You know,
they got everything. They got everything. They
got it all.
Jason, I just want to talk about too when it comes to the whole Sandy Hook thing. I didn't even look into this stuff at all. It's not my forte. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. But I have questions though about the Las Vegas shooting. You know what I'm saying? Because it just seems, and it was like, well, wait a second. And then I started thinking about Alex Jones and what he was saying. It's like they want to disarm the people, right? They want to take away weapons from the people. Fast forward to today, it's like, holy shit, there is some kind of liquidity to what's being going on. I mean, like I said, I have never looked into any Sandy Hook stuff. I will not do it. I don't want to put myself near there. It's one of those situations, but a lot of red flags when it comes to the Las Vegas shooting, and you start thinking about the motive. Our Second Amendment, which a lot of a leftist like myself was always like, well, we don't need semi-automatic weapons. We should get rid of it right away. You know what I'm saying? Like, get rid of all these things, make sure it's harder to get a gun. But nowadays, I'm fearful of somebody coming after my ass. I'm like, well, maybe I might need a gun. You know what I'm saying? Yes. But it's interesting.